Hello, thank you for joining us today. My name is Ligaiya. I'm the Operations Director of the Asian American Documentary Network. I'm currently calling from Haudenosaunee, Atiwanderunk, Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, also known as the Niagara region in Canada, currently on a trip. And so I'm a female brown-skinned Asian woman with straight, long black hair in a black shirt, sitting at a desk in a room with a blurred background. So welcome everyone to our Impact series. I just wanted to give a quick welcome. So since we have so many people joining us that are not within the ADOC community, are not members, but part of partner organizations, have heard about our session. So wanted to welcome you into this space. ADOC is a national network of over 1,300 Asian American storytellers and film professionals working to increase the visibility and support of Asian Americans in the documentary field. And if you're not a member with us, please feel free to visit us at a-doc.org/join-us to learn more about us, to join our newsletter mailing list, or become a member and join our community on Slack. And we'll have also those links in the chat. We are actually also recording this session that will go up on our YouTube, so you can reference this back. And so next, I actually want to introduce Ash Gohua. She is our newest Impact coordinator who has joined our ADOC staff, and so want her to welcome this series and welcome our filmmakers that are here. So Ash, I'll turn it over to you.
Hi everybody, thank you for being here. I am calling from the traditional lands of the Prairie Island Indian community, also known as Red Wing, Minnesota. I'm a Chinese person with medium length dark hair and a blurred background. I want to give a quick introduction to our Impact Speaker series before we jump in. Really, the series pose a set of questions that like, how do we redefine impact? What can impact look like through a lens of cultural strategy, political education, and various ways of documentary film / storytelling, how that can inspire and catalyze change. And the series aims to provide the ADOC network and beyond with a shared understanding and analysis of how film and storytelling can support and create social change for our communities. Also want to give an acknowledgement and give thanks to the series and the work that has came before it. It is a part of ADOC's Impact Initiative that builds up the work of the ADOC to have a forward Impact Lab that happened last year. Cecilia Mejia's work as Impact Director, and we have an upcoming Impact Fellowship program that we will share more about very soon. The Impact Working Group includes myself and project leads PJ Raval and Gary Leonard. I'm going to now introduce Adamu Chan, who's going to moderate our conversation today. Adamu is pronounced like he, him. He's a filmmaker, writer, and community organizer from the Bay Area who was incarcerated at San Quentin State Prison during one of the largest COVID-19 outbreaks in the country. He produced numerous short films while incarcerated, using his vantage point and experience as an incarcerated person as a lens to focus the viewer's gaze on issues related to social justice. In 2021, he was a recipient of the Docs in Action Film Fund through Working Films and was tapped to produce and direct his film, What These Walls Won't Hold, which won Best Documentary Mid-Length at the 2023 San Francisco International Film Festival. In 2022, Adamu directed a documentary short for the doc series Bridge Builders, partnering with ITVS/Independent Lens, about a community member working at the intersections of immigration, incarceration, and gender justice. He's also a 2022 Stanford University Center for Comparative Studies in Race and Ethnicity Mellon Arts Fellow, and a 2023 Rockwood Institute Documentary Leaders Fellow. Adamu draws inspiration and energy from the voices of those directly impacted and seeks to empower them to reshape the narratives that have been created about them through film.
Thanks, Ash. Do you want me to jump in?
Go for it.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I want to thank ADOC for providing this space and this opportunity to talk about something that's very important to me and sure all of y'all too. And I'm going to do my best here. So I want to start off with introducing our very special panelists, who I don't know super well, actually just meeting for the first time today, but excited to be in conversation with them. So the first panelist is Sonya Childress. Sonya uses she, her pronouns and is a veteran cultural strategist who believes in the transformative power of film. She co-directs the Color Congress, an ecosystem builder that resources, supports, and connects organizations led by people of color that serve nonfiction filmmakers, leaders, and audiences of color across the US and territories with Sahar Driver. As senior fellow with the Perspective Fund, she incubated projects to move the documentary field towards equity, ethics, and impact. She spent 2 decades leading impact campaigns and distribution strategies at Active Voice, California Newsreel, and Firelight Media, where she piloted a fellowship for impact producers of color. She's a board member of the Central Center for Cultural Power, a member of the Documentary Accountability Working Group, shout outs, a working group member for the Lens Reflected Study, a 2015 Rockwood Just Films Fellow, and a recipient of the 2022 Leading Light Award from Doc NYC, and a member of the Academy of Motion Pictures Arts and Sciences. Sonya is a Los Angeles native of Puerto Rican African-American descent and a proud mother of 2. Thanks for being with us, and thanks for all your work. Thank you so much. I felt so seen by you in your writing and the work that you do in the world. So appreciate you being here. Our second panelist, Ligaiya Romero, uses they, he pronouns, is a trans non-binary documentary filmmaker and visual artist working with collective memory and the decolonial imagination. They directed the film Becoming the Moon about Filipino-American artist Maya Cruz Palaleo for PBS American Masters, Firelight, and Topic. He was also the video producer and editor for The Argus Project, a transmedia documentary on police violence and citizen counter surveillance. The project was a collaboration with Copwatch NYC, supported by Tribeca New Media Fund, and presented at Tribeca Film Festival. Ligaiya was a Firelight Media Documentary Lab Fellow, a CAM Fellow, and a Karen Schmier Diversity in the Edit Room Fellow. They are currently working on a project about the end of the world. I'm interested in that. Is there any other ways in which y'all would like to introduce yourselves or present yourself to this group of people?
Yeah, I can start with my land acknowledgement. I would like to acknowledge that I am on the traditional and ancestral territory of the indigenous Munsee, Lenape, and Canarsie people, who are the past, present, and future caretakers of this land. As filmmakers, we have the power to shape stories, to build context, and shift culture. Land acknowledgements help us fight back against the erasure of Native peoples and their stories. They frame our work as an intentional disruption of cultural genocide, cultural repression, and cultural appropriation. We all have a responsibility to consider what it means to truly acknowledge the history and legacy of colonialism and genocide with our thoughts, our words, and our actions. I second the call to invite people to make their own acknowledgements in the chat. I'll also describe myself for those who are listening. I am a trans, non-binary, brown-skinned person of Filipino descent with a shaved head, with some black hair, wearing a black top, sitting in front of a shelf full of plants, houseplants. Thank you.
Thank you, Adamu and Ligaiya. Sonya, she, her. I'm joining from land that's been stewarded by the Tongva, Chumash, Costanoan, Luiseño, and Hashiman people, and I'm in known as the LBC, as Long Beach, California. I'm a Black woman with glasses, green and white headband, wearing a denim dress against an African mud cloth, magenta, purple. It's giving jewel tones, textile background with the words Color Congress in the corner. So happy to be in conversation and community with you all.
Thanks, Shaw. So happy to be here too. I can give a visual description of myself too. I am a brown-skinned man of Asian and Black descent, with Black rimmed glasses and a bun on top of my head. I wanted to kind of start off with a tone setting piece. And so here's a short clip by Nigerian filmmaker Usman Simbane that I kind of felt like could kind of set the tone for what we're going to talk about today. So please bear with me.
Je me suis trouvé à l'âge de 40 ans en vadrouille à travers l'Afrique, au Congo du temps de Lumumba. 40 ans, j'avais 40 ans. Quand j'ai pris conscience que le cinéma facilitait la prise de conscience, parce que le cinéma c'est un meeting permanent avec le public. Dans une salle de cinéma, vous avez catholiques, musulmans, gaullistes, communistes et tout ça. Quand le film est bon, chacun perçoit et accepte ce qu'il veut. C'est ça qui m'a amené au cinéma pour mieux poursuivre ma quête de militantisme. Maintenant, si vous me demandez ce que je préfère individuellement, je préfère la littérature que le cinéma. Mais ça, c'est un luxe. De nos jours, la littérature est un luxe. Mais pour prendre le raccourci de l'histoire avec la tradition de l'oralité, le cinéma devient pour nous un outil important. Et il est de tous les arts d'expression les plus faciles et les plus agréables pour un grand public. Malheureusement, le cinéma coûte cher, demande beaucoup d'investissement, tant humain que financier.
I hope everyone could hear that. The audio was okay? Okay, good. Sorry, I'm not great with this tech stuff. Yeah, I mean, I love so much what Simbane has to say, and wanted to ask you both about what you see as the possibilities of the film for social transformation, and kind of why you've chosen this as a space to organize and build community and yeah, anyone who wants to jump in. Sorry, yes, he is Senegalese. I'm so sorry.
We're gonna be like this the whole time. Do you want to go, Ligaiya? I can jump in. I mean, I you know what I love about that clip every time I see it is like Simbane's just like rattling off, and people are like furiously taking note. I mean, to be in a classroom with Simbane would have been just beyond. So I just love seeing the faces of the students taking him all in. I mean, you know, I mean, I think part of what like kind of Simbane talks about, and when you think about even the role of, you know, post-colonial African countries and the role of cinema as nation building and as a tool for nation building, and I know it's not fair to call cinema a tool because that kind of instrumentalizes an art form that should have value beyond like being a, you know, its utility as a thing. But it's a tool in the best, you know, in the best possible sense. It's a tactic, it's a gift, you know, for the nation building project. It, you know, and when it's seen as a tool of nation building, it's about speaking to the people of that area, not to like double down on boundaries and borders, but it is like speaking to the people of a nation about who they are, about who their what their history is. It's about what their culture is. It's building culture of a people. It's codifying culture of a people. It's documenting the culture of a people. It's complicating the culture of a people and the history of a people and an identity of a people. And it's also shaping those things. It's critiquing it, it's documenting it, and it's shaping it all at the same time. And what I love about that idea is that when we, so much about our documentary cinema is about explaining communities to other people. And cinema as nation building is about showing a mirror to a people about themselves. And so anyway, that's all what comes up to me about Simben's piece and you starting us there, because that's to me what the beauty of cinema is really about.
Oof, I'm getting shivers as usual, just hearing you speak, Sonya, and being part of this conversation, because to be honest, Sonya, I think you were one of the first people to really show me that our films didn't have to be that they weren't just for convincing some outsider that I'm worthy of my dignity and of my safety, and that I belong here. Cinema as a mirror, I think for me has been a more restorative process, and one that I think that I want to keep working with and trying to understand for myself for the rest of my life. I think thinking about like the conversations around cinema's strategy, right? It's a strategy for our social justice movements. It's a strategy for our joy, for our peace, for our for maintaining the energy and community to stay here, and when I think of the conversation about film as narrative change, I think of narrative change has to start with narrative questioning, right? Like for me, my personal journey is I first had to understand that what I saw as objective or I thought was reality was just an ocean of stories that I was swimming in, that I couldn't see yet, and I knew something was off, but I couldn't understand yet as a young person that those stories weren't real, not all of them, right? That they were shaped by power and histories of oppression, and history of liberation, history of our liberation movements. So yeah, I think, whatever, is it corny for me to say like the Spider-Man, like with great responsibility, with great power comes great responsibility. But I think about that a lot with film, because film is culture, like Sonya said, and that comes with a lot. That comes with a lot, as we already see. And film is just one way that we shape culture and the world around us.
Thanks, Shaw. I love all of this. Sonya, did you have something you want to say?
Are you going to answer these questions too, Adamu?
Yeah, I am.
To
I am. I'm trying to make this into a conversation. I mean, I think, one of the reasons why I chose that clip, I just feel like it resonates so much with me. But I think about like the legacy of like Black creative expression in this country and in the world, and how it's, resonated across the world. I grew up in the era of the culture of hip hop, and that's influenced the way that I see the world and how I see art in so many ways. But also, like, I feel like there's a piece in there where he's talking specifically about accessibility and about the cost and effort of film. And I think those things are interesting because, like, I also see, the legacy of Black creative expression in this country as realizing accessibility through these platforms that are made possible by the appetites of dominant groups, right? And about those groups, like curiosity about the other and about like entertainment, let's just be honest. And that has provided an avenue to communicate across the diaspora, right? To communicate with a lot of different people, to build solidarity, to provide like refuge and healing and share information across the diaspora. And so, I mean, I think that that's kind of like an interesting kind of contradiction maybe, or a complexity of when we think about impact and when we think about strategy. And I think that leads into kind of like my next question, like within that context, like how do y'all define narrative and culture change that is like not centered on dominant groups or not centered on the gaze of dominant groups? And maybe like talking about a campaign that you've been involved in that employed like an inside out strategy as opposed to like outside in or top down, something like that.
You want me to go first, Sonia? Okay, yeah, thank you for that question. Yeah, I think what I was saying earlier about like narrative change beginning with narrative questioning. And for me, the questioning starts with myself, right? Like this question starts with understanding what is my role in the world that I want to nurture, in the communities that are most important to me, that I have the deepest relationships with, and what is my specific gift or offering that I'm best positioned to contribute, or I want to learn how to be best positioned to contribute in that way. And I think about like when again, like thinking about how it's not like the film isn't always for like this outsider, right, or for like a dominant gaze. And I would add to that and say, I feel like the power of film is so strong that even if no one saw my films, at the very least, I would be changed, right? Like I have been politicized by the processes of questioning of that projects have allowed me to sit with. And it's not easy, you know, it's not easy, and it's not a quick process. And it's not a process that can always be contained by these kinds of like grant cycles or right, like the cycles of commercially or commissioned produced film projects. So I think it is a really long and important process. I think do I want to add something to that? I think the last thing I'll say, like, I mean, narrative change, I think back on some of the narratives that either narratives of reform or narratives of assimilation, you know, that I really bought into in the past. And I think about how difficult it is for someone, you know, if someone just went to me as a young person, or even now, and was like, this is how, you know, this is what the story that you believe, and this is the story that really is. I'm not sure that strategy would really work, you know, like, and sometimes I think about that's why maybe sometimes people who disagree with our movements, they still watch our films and they just can't see it, or they can't receive it, right? So I guess I'm saying, I think about more about like the process of self-questioning. I feel like has been a more impactful. What conditions can our films create so that it encourages people to do the self-questioning versus the it's less about like education and more about like self-reflection.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, to me, I feel like that is central to a lot of the work that I want to do, is that a lot of, I feel like narrative kind of like change strategy is about changing these like dominant ideologies. And I mean, I live in the Bay Area, and I feel like a lot of times it's hard for me because I think this is a place that is very dominated by liberal politics, and folks have the right, feel like they have the right positions on political issues, but yet and still like the material experience of this place feels very racist to me and very like unequal, and maybe even more so than like places that I've gone to in the deep South. You know, San Francisco has very, I mean, I feel like the narrative that exists when you walk down the street, if you came here from another place, would be that would be something that maybe wouldn't come out of people's mouths, right? Or that people could imagine in their minds. And I think that like sometimes that internal questioning and questioning within our own communities and kind of seems like a more hopeful kind of practice and something that seems more achievable. I don't know if you wanted to jump in, Sonya.
I mean, I guess what I would just add is, narratives and just culture are like politically neutral, meaning, they could be used for good, for, all kinds of impulses, right? And if narratives are just collections of stories, and stories sometimes are connected to myths, when I feel like a lot of times when we're talking about narrative change, we're talking about the left in particular is talking about narrative change. And we're also in some ways talking about critiquing the myths of this country, the myth making that gets transmitted through our culture with these big myths about who we are. We're a nation of immigrants, justice is blind, whatever, all these things that are in some ways mythologized into narratives that we are swimming in and may or may not have any real fact or basis in our lived realities, but they're myths. They're narratives that we're a part of, that are a part of this culture, that are like tied to the culture and the history of this country. And what that also means is that even though we're spending a lot of time and there's more and more resources in the last 10 years to really address narrative change alone is not going to change the material reality of people, right? You can have a shift on narrative change around marriage equality, which there absolutely was, which paved the way, a shift narratively around the LGBTQ community, which paved the way for marriage equality. But you can also have a swing in the moment that we're in, which is a response to that, right? A backlash to that. And the narrative, the meta narrative is actually really different from what's happening on the ground right now. So narrative change alone and culture change alone, divorce from on the ground organizing, divorce from political activism and electoral politics, divorce from legal advocacy and the courts, divorced from, is nothing. I mean, it's not nothing, but it's myth, it's just a myth. But if it's in coordination, then all of a sudden now you're cooking with gas, And so I think that is also a reminder to folks who are working in the impact space and documentaries. If we're just talking about changing narratives with our work, but we don't have a hand in or real pulse on what's happening on the ground with organizing, that's really people to people, like I'm starting to feel differently about this issue or about these people because of my constant relationship with them. That's changing. It's changing my perceptions. Then that narrative shift up here is like, okay, now I see what's happening because it's happening to me here. And it's also happening to me legislatively. And it's also happening to me politically. But it's all got to be in conversation with one another for there to be a real shift in the material lived realities of people. I'm not discounting like the importance of narrative change, but like it's an important, but it's one piece of how change happens, I think. And I would say there's a quote that I love, which is from G. Kim, Liz Hines, and Nima Shirazi in the piece that they wrote, Toward a New Gravity. And they say narratives are powerful. They can swing juries and elections. They can fill prisons, but they can also fill the streets. What I like about that is like, it can go either way. We're not the only ones playing with narratives right now. We're not the only ones playing with them. And ultimately, a narrative is just a myth until it's grounded somewhere.
I'm really excited to hear you underline that it's an ecosystem, right? Like we just like our movements, we have many tactics, many tools, many roles, and we're strongest that way, right? We're strongest decentralized but interconnected, right? Versus completely hierarchical. Because when you're hierarchical, when our movements are shaped like a triangle, what happens when you lose the top, right? And so, but if you're fluid, if you're a murmuration of birds, if you're following the deepest relationships that are closest to you, if you're working in small pods of whatever, small groups, then you're fluid. We're harder to contain, which is really exciting. And maybe this is taking the conversation in a direction that we don't need to go in, but I do think about that, there needs to, in my opinion, I think there needs to be narrative shift even within the spaces of narrative shift. For example, like I feel like there's a lot of weight, and rightfully so, but there's a lot of weight on specifically like electoral change, right? Electoral campaigns. And when I look at our movements and the movements that I feel like I've been most inspired by and excited to be in relationship with, electoral policy, that all of that is so, policy change is so important. And as Sonya is saying, it's just one of many, many tactics, and so, yeah, I want more stories that kind of balance out the many tools that we have in our ecosystem.
Amazing. Yeah, this is amazing. Amazing. I'm so glad that we're going in this direction. I think bringing it back to kind of like the impact piece, I wanted to know what y'all think about, specifically like for folks who are thinking about how to kind of quantify impact. So actually, let me backtrack real quick. So I think like for filmmakers who are thinking about a film project, do you feel like it's important for folks to be thinking, I mean, from my orientation, like those two things are always connected, right? I work from within a community and impact has to be a part of that process. But for filmmakers who are thinking about a project, like, do you all feel like impact is integral to not only like how to think about things on the back end of the film, but also like how the process moves and like how that can shape actually like how the film is created and how maybe participants are treated or their stories are cared for?
I mean, I can jump in here. It's important for me to always say that I'm not a filmmaker. So my 20 years has been getting handed a film and working a film in a community and working, letting the film do its magic and do its alchemy. So I'm not part of the filmmaking process, but I can tell that when a filmmaker has an aim for impact, has a goal in their minds for that the film is going to make a political or a narrative impact on an issue or a community, when that community has not been involved in a substantial or significant way in the making and the shaping of that film, there's a difference in impact. And it took me too long to fully understand that. I think maybe I felt it, vibed it, like something's not, the math is not mathing here with this film. It's supposed to be doing these things. But when I show it to the people who that's their personal experience, is not doing those things, or when I'm, and I'm the community supposedly served by a film, and it's not landing with me the way it's landing on people who are like, oh, is that your experience? So I think it took me years, I think, to fully understand that impact starts with, well, before you even pick up a camera. And that though it's, we have been spending so much time as folks of color in our field talking about, we need to get access to the filmmaking, to this field, access to the tools of filmmaking to be able to tell our story. It's about who's telling the story. It's about what we're telling a story about. And it really took me 20 years to figure out, it's also about how we tell our stories. Because even folks who are telling stories from within their communities can cause harm to those communities if we are coming in a way that's extractive, if we're not centering care, if we're like, I'm gonna save my own people, and this is the story that my people need in order for us to be less bashed in the head by whomever. Or, all the different impulses that are within us that maybe we haven't fully journaled through. Iyanla Vanzant has not done her thing with us yet, and we have not worked through all of our stuff, and we're working through it in filmmaking and maybe even in service of our own communities, but we are not doing it in collaboration with those folks and with the folks whose stories are actually, we are simply stewarding, not telling and not, translating, but we're stewarding their stories. And I think sometimes harm can happen, unwanted, unconscious things play out. And so I think all of that, I think, led to me joining up with other folks and thinking about that documentary accountability, creating that documentary accountability working group a couple of years ago to really think about, let's focus on the how. What does it mean when all of the intentions are right, but we actually don't know how to put those intentions into practice? What does it mean to have a care-centered filmmaking practice? What does it mean to have a values-centered filmmaking practice? What are the values that undergird people's filmmaking practices? We're never asked to articulate them. And when we don't articulate them, we put all kinds of stuff. We're all kinds of impulses are running through our filmmaking, and it shows up in our practices. So I think that is the shift that it took me way too long to make.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think I struggle with quantitative measures of what that impact and care can look like. And I don't say that to completely so then just throw it all out the window. Like anything quantitative is useless to me. I think similar to this ecosystem we're talking about, the quantitative measures are helpful and they can never be the full picture, right? If it, what does it mean when we say, we met with 100 people, what did those conversations look like? What are the relationships over how long of time? Who are those people, But I do, to answer your question, I do think that impact in the sense of a care and consent plan, a risk assessment, a power and positionality assessment of certainly the filmmaker and the team and all contributors does need to happen for every project, even if it was, I think even if it was a project that wasn't directly about a social issue or a specific community or movement. I just think it's so valuable to be able to practice those concepts. And what else can I say about that? I think that's what I think about when I think about impact. And similar to how Sonya was like, I have to start by saying I'm not a filmmaker. I should start by saying I'm not an impact producer. I care very much about and appreciate very much what impact strategy has allowed me to, again, like the tools and the frameworks for conversations that our communities were already having as far as care and consent and power. But I do struggle with maybe the requirements of how impact, or the limits of how impact can or can't be communicated, especially for grants, especially for, I just struggle personally with like timelines of institutional timelines that I think community building often goes at a different pace. It's the speed of relationships and trust.
And change on endemic social issues isn't going to happen in a 12-month grant period. And yet, if you're talking about culture, if what we're doing when we're also resourcing documentary film and nonfiction film is contributing to pro-social culture change, then that requires philanthropy and public media and all the entities to be investing in a long-term strategy, which means an avalanche of stories. It needs to hit people, that like narrative wave, pro-social narrative wave or progressive narrative waves or whatever, need to hit people like a wave. You don't just go to the ocean and see one wave. It's waves. And then you're like, I'm at the ocean. This is an ocean hitting me, one after another, after another, after another. And that is what it takes over time to actually shift culture. It is a long-term process. It's a long-term strategy. It is a long-term investment. There is not one single film that is going to make change on any single issue alone. It is, and so any contribution to a shift in like a narrative that centers justice and humanity of, you know, people who've been decentered and treated so poorly for generations, structurally, interpersonally, requires just all of that storytelling. Small, tiny little stories, big structural stories, like all of it. And so when we are asked to quantify impact in a 12-month grant period, and we don't have language to talk about the contribution it's going to make to a larger narrative shift on that issue, then both we're at a disadvantage, and so are the folks who are assessing the value of that work.
Yeah, love that. I mean, I love this idea, just to reflect back to y'all, of like narrative and culture change also happening within the film industry at the same time that we are trying to change whatever the quote unquote issue or subject of the film is. But, you know, like specifically in my case, in the community that I work from within, you know, the media industry has had a particularly, like, to be honest, like violent, like history with that community. And like moving with care and, you know, trust, and at, like you said, the speed of relationships is something that I also feel like is like a huge part of like what impact looks like. I also wanted to say, like, I did have, like, I was at Black Star this last weekend, and a funder came up to me and asked about how they are supposed to assess whether or not folks are using like ethical practices. And I think this is maybe I'm seeing that we're supposed to go into Q&A. Anyways, that this is I think something that maybe we don't, I don't know if y'all have an answer for this, but I think what y'all were talking about is a certain formula. And I know that Documentary Accountability Working Group is trying to provide tools for folks, but I'm thinking about, like, you know, every community has its own kind of, you know, complexities and nuances. And so there isn't really a formula for kind of how to move. And each project dictates that. But maybe just wanted to ask as the last question about like how y'all are navigating, or how folks should navigate around like how to quantify those things, how to kind of open those conversations, how to communicate those things to funders, because yeah, it's like it is an important like aspect of like getting a project or film out to the world. Sorry about that question.
I can just say, I mean, I can appreciate, I'm not trying to, critique our peers who are resourcing this work, because what they're in a position of is trying to identify and weed out folks who are moving unethically, folks who are moving without consent, not just proximity consent, real like informed consent. And when we find these egregious examples of folks who are moving in such an unethical way, then the heat comes on the backs of funders who is like, how did you let that go through? How did you fund that one? Wasn't that obvious that they didn't have consent? They didn't have real relationship. They had no, whatever. And so then naturally your funders are going to be going to folks like you, Adamu, and being like, well, how would I have known? How should I know? What am I looking for in a proposal that gives me a sense that there's real, not just relationship, but consent, respect, an exchange. And maybe it is asking more questions about process. What is your process of, new grants have asked for, what's your accountability process? Meaning, what is your process of being in, holding yourself accountable to the people whose stories you're telling? And then if that stumps someone, they haven't thought about it, or this is really new language, and then the funder has to explain what that language means, what that framework is about. But at least it is requiring folks to grapple with something. And then you get some nuance from there. But I can appreciate what funders are trying to do, which is mitigate really horrible examples that are out there. And it is hard to know, because you can also just say all the flowery things and it's not really grounded in anything either. So I can appreciate the struggle on that end.
Yeah, and I feel like I can't think of an answer that wouldn't require time and relationship building, right? Like to Sonia's point, like someone could just write all the words in their application essay about accountability and consent. I think similar to a lot of important questions in my life about ethics, I'm maybe less interested in having like a definite answer to that question, and more interested in what is like the practice of like maybe we'll never actually reach that bar, but like what is the practice of laboring and striving and committing to moving toward reaching that bar, because yeah, I would have a hard time answering that question without, my first thought is like, well, of course, well, you would talk to everybody on the team, you would talk to all the contributors, you would ask them, you would ask them about their relationships, you would ask them about, and Sonya brought up the idea of informed consent, and thinking about if the question just is, do you have consent? Someone can say yes, but is it enthusiastic consent? Is it informed? Is it continuous? Is it affirmative? Like what is your definition of consent? My definition of consent, and our entire team's definition of consent, and how are we putting that into everyday practice through this project? Those are hard questions, but those are also the questions that I'm most excited about. So I think the last thing that I want to say on that piece is, if there are people listening to this panel and thinking like, oh my God, that's so hard, like I don't even want to make films anymore. I just, sometimes for me, it's like that's been the most rewarding piece about being a filmmaker, is that we struggle toward the highest level of care, the most compassionate level of being in relationship with each other. And that's what I mean when I say that I've been like politicized through this work, through this community, and the questions that it really asks me to consider.
Thanks, y'all. I am gonna go, because we're running low on time, to the first question that's come through from Maya. Shout outs to Maya. The question is, I'm wondering if panelists can delve into the specifics of the challenges, loopholes that they have witnessed and experienced and see potentials for larger industrial level change, perhaps linking them into specific experiences and examples. I'd love to learn from their experience.
Experience in Maya, are you asking about experience in impact producing? Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure. I mean, go ahead.
How to improve the house of impact producing? Okay, got it. Well, I can start really quickly. So what I'll just say is back in like 2005 and 2006, I did back-to-back impact campaigns on 2 films. One was on folks who were wrongfully incarcerated, and one was on death penalty abolition. And I didn't know the filmmakers extremely well, but I was introduced to the film participants, some of whom had just returned home, had just been released, and I was in charge of sending them on the road if they could travel out of state lines. And that also meant that I was also sometimes going with them and in screenings with them and prepping them. So this was 2005. I'd been at the kind of impact work for a number of years already before then, and working with, refugees and transracial adoptees and dreamers. And, I've been thinking a lot about folks who are documented or not at the time, violence prevention folks. I hadn't really worked with this particular community of folks and wasn't too keyed in on these sensitivities. And my sensitivity level was so low that I wasn't seeing what they were experiencing as they were coming out of screenings after screenings after screenings, telling their story about being both wrongfully incarcerated, put on death penalty, and then released. And now also they were just released and now they're on the road with a film that is showing their worst days of their lives on screen over and over again, with audiences that were like eating popcorn and sipping, Fanta while they were listening, and then asking lots of questions that were not only extremely probing and intimate, but inappropriate and beyond the bounds of probably what they were being asked by the director. And it was not sitting right because what we were saying with the impact campaign was about political shift. We were not concerned about what was happening to these men. We were concerned about what was happening to those men writ large and the conversation about these folks. And we had skipped the impact conversation over these folks who were having a very specific experience that was possibly validating and possibly negative and triggering. And we were skipping over to the issue. And my job was to have a shift on the issue. And I was realizing that I was in conversation and relationship with these men who were having a totally different experience that they couldn't talk about publicly because they didn't want to critique the filmmaker who could potentially have impact on, all of their lives, who were stewarding their stories. And I was seeing the complications of the impact work when the impact work is laser focused on policy shifts, because you're thinking about meta change and you're not thinking about individual change. But when you skip over the individual change, it can actually create individual harm, even if you're trying on the road to get to the policy change. There's like bodies, and we shouldn't be leaving bodies on the road, whether those bodies are the crew that didn't really get compensated, or the folks whose stories are getting told and they're getting re-triggered and re-traumatized. And I was a part of that, out of just because I was not trained in trauma-informed healing-centered work. I wasn't trained. I was trained on how to organize with film. And so it took me like years later when I was working with Black Panthers, Doc, and working with, Panthers, many of whom also were formerly incarcerated, but had been out much longer, and seeing their PTSD triggered, untreated PTSD triggered, when they were seeing scenes of their arrests or shootouts that they were in that the crowd was cheering for, but they were wincing at or walking out of and hanging out with me in the lobby because it was so painful to see that over and over again, that it finally hit me from things that I'd been seeing years before, that when we skip over the people, the care for the people at the center of our films, to what the film can do for that community, we are possibly doing harm. And that, to me, those are examples of folks who taught me something about my process as an impact producer, about the collective impact and the spiritual impact of this work, not just the political impact of documentary, but the spiritual impact of this work on everyone involved. It can be a net positive or net negative based on the process, not just the idea and the politics, but the process. And that just shifted in me. And I feel pain that I was part of something that was hurtful to folks unknowingly, because I had no training and no real framework for it. And I'm grateful that even if that means filmmakers tremble when they pick up a camera because they don't want to do harm and they're worried about that, I'd rather that. And I know the folks, young filmmakers are like, well, damn, this thing seems too hard. There's so many pitfalls and minefields that I have to work through to even make a film that isn't going to be damaging. I'd almost rather that impulse than the other impulse, which is pick up a camera, it's my story to tell. That's where I am right now. I'll evolve, but that's where I'm landing in this moment in the year Beyonce 2023.
Yeah, that idea of starting with the closest in proximity, the individual, right? Instead of like this ends justify the means, like who cares if we leave like a trail of hurt and harmed people as long as we get to like policy change, you know what I mean? I think the small is everything. You know, Adrienne Marie Brown has the whole concept of fractals and small being all, and you transform the world by first transforming self, and then that self connects in deep relationship with the you know the pod of people around you, and then your pod connects with another pod, and you create this like mycelial network, this ecosystem of, again, decentralized but interconnected. I think what can make it hard, to the question again of like quantifying impact or like justifying impact, is that the budgets of films, as we know, can be so high. So I feel like that. I feel like for me, like I've encountered this narrative where it's like, if I'm giving you $650,000, it better lead to some policy change, or like, it's got to be like this like top level thing. Right. And again, I would really challenge that, that idea that, that small and deep, right, is less important than far and thin, you know, or wide and thin, whatever that analogy is. And I would, this is something that I've been thinking about a lot in the last few years, is like, I'm really been drawn to the cheapest filmmaking possible. You know, I think that's like can be really hard for us filmmakers, or just for speaking for myself, because, you know, we love beautiful visuals, we love sweeping, you know, crane shots and gorgeous lenses and things like that. But I really think about like, what is the cost of that? And again, I'm not saying like throw aesthetic completely out the window. For me, it's an invitation to do more with less, go small, go deep, and that's for me just as impactful, if not more.
Yes, thank you for all of that. That's amazing. And at the heart of, I feel like what y'all are saying is that like relationships are really an important fundamental part of this work and everything that we do in the world, in my opinion. We are out of time. I know that Ash wanted to come in. I also wanted to give y'all an opportunity to plug anything that you might want to say as a last thing. I really appreciate y'all. This was amazing. You shared beautiful insights, and I wish that we could have another, because I feel like there's more. But just wanted to thank y'all and just give you an opportunity if you want to say any like closing parting words.
I have nothing to plug, so I'll just uplift your local mutual aid group, your local anarchist, decentralized, but interconnected care practices. And yeah, and just excited to be in community with you all.
There's some resources there on the folks in Maui. And it just always, whenever I'm invited back to ADOC, I say yes. And I will always say yes. So good to be in community with y'all. Thank you for the deft moderation, Adamu.
I try.
And Ash and Lailani, thank you for organizing it on the back end. Appreciate you both as well. And Ligaiya, my heart is with you always.
Thank you. Thank you, Sonya. Thank you, Adamu, Ash, Lailani, ADOC, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here, everybody. Before everybody hopped off, I just wanted to plug that in the chat, you will find links to the rest of the programming for the rest of the Impact series. There are 4 more conversations left every month: September, October, November, December. You can RSVP for next month's session as well through that Google Sheet. And if you are not a member of ADOC, you can follow us on Instagram or join the e-newsletter. And yeah, today's session will be, and the rest of the sessions will be available on ADOC's YouTube. So you can also go back to that amazing conversation and rewatch the whole thing again. All right. Thank you so much for being here, everybody. It was good to share space. Ciao.